Well, John, another issue we should perhaps discuss today, which is very current. This is June of 2020, and we're right in the middle of our coronavirus.
Yep.
And Arizona is started to reopen maybe about almost a month ago, but our cases and the hospitalizations are certainly spiking up right now, and we're not real sure what our governor's going to do over the next week or 10 days. But certainly something needs to be done. And of course, at the same time, the University of Arizona is looking at what should they do in August when the students come back. Do the students come back? How many of the classes are we going to have on campus, and how many of them are going to be remote? Well, one of the things that we've been working on is what kind of environment should the University of Arizona provide for the students and faculty when they do? What's important from an HVAC standpoint? And the same question could be asked, what's going to happen when the kids go back to K through 12 and that? So there's a lot of questions about this.
Businesses starting to open up.
Right, business, what are we supposed to do? Well, one of the things that's interesting that's happened in the last 100 days is there's been a fair amount of at least preliminary research done that would show the virus lasts longer when there is low relative humidities. Now, I've got to be careful when I say this because part of this was always counterintuitive to me. What seems to happen is, like as we're sitting here right now, and when people speak and the droplets leave their mouth, the more humid it is, the less evaporation occurs, and the droplets stay heavy and they fall. And so when the humidity is high enough, what happens is the droplets leave your mouth, get out about 3 feet and fall, and gravity takes care of it. As we have lower relative humidities, lower dew points, then what happens is as you expel these droplets very quickly, I mean literally within maybe 3 or 4 feet, 90% of it is evaporated. And now these droplets and the virus is now just particulates on this airstream. And they'll last a half an hour in this room, where before, when we had a higher relative humidity and little or no evaporation, they maintained their mass and they fell to the ground. So the conclusion of all of that is, okay, then what minimum relative humidity do we need to have in an office, in a classroom, in a hospital, to allow these droplets not to get aerosolized, but just stay and fall down, let gravity do its job. And the consensus is somewhere around 35 or 40% relative humidity. And you can kind of talk about that. That would be at 75 degrees and 30% relative humidity. You're right about there in that psych chart, which is right about a 40-degree dew point. So that provides some indication that as HVAC professionals, one of our recommendations should be, not now because we're moving into, it's getting not so much warmer, it's getting warmer, but it's getting more humid. The more humid it is, then the droplets fall quicker and hit the dirt, and we don't have to worry about it. But as we move through the school year and, we go from September to October to November, sometime perhaps around Thanksgiving, when our ambient dew points drop below 40 degrees, and again, we can have dew points in the wintertime at, 15 or 20, and remarkably in Tucson, in the summertime, in May and June, we have some of our lowest dew points down here. And so we would need to humidify even in May and June. Then we could kind of turn it off when our monsoons come in, because we hear, the dew point's above 50, the monsoons are coming, that's great. And that's true. So we would want to look at, do we need to provide individual humidification for each one of the air handlers in each one of the systems at the University of Arizona? That's being debated right now, and we'll see what happens. But one of the things you can use, as a humidifier is an evap cooler, because as we all know, if you were to take outside air down here at, pick a number, 100 degrees, and like what we have in the summertime of 10% relative humidity, where the wet bulb temperature is only about, probably 58. And an evap cooler, what it does on this psychrometric chart is follow the wet bulb lines. So, and that adds lots of moisture. So one of the possibilities of adding moisture to a classroom, especially in May and June, is simply run some air through an evap cooler, and you do that. But we're definitely in uncharted waters. We've only been thinking about this for 100 days. There's not a but also in 100 days, 110,000 people have died from this coronavirus. So it's certainly something that's got our attention. And at least most everything seems to support the idea that relative humidities above 35% minimize the transmission, and relative humidities below 30% propagate the transmission. So if those
Makes sense.
if that is in fact the case, then we need to look and say our indoor air environment, and again, across most of America, those relative humidities those low relative humidities only exist in the cold winter months. And if you live in Minnesota, and it's 30 degrees outside, well, the dew point's below 30. If the dew point's below 30, then probably the relative humidity in your house is probably 15%, because you're keeping your house at 68 or 70 degrees. So I think over the next year or so, we're going to learn more about this, and the HVAC community will in fact address this, and recommendations will come out. And if it is, then it's a pretty straightforward thing to figure out how much outside air is coming in, how much moisture do we need to add to this outside air, and all of those things are certainly easily, well, on an individual basis, easy to implement. I mean, when you're talking about something like the University of Arizona that's got 14 million square feet of built environment, well, then you got to decide what that cost and is it worth it. And again, that's pretty much beyond our pay grade. Is it worth it? We're not sure how much one should spend providing a safe environment in the built environment. I'm not sure that's. But I think as time goes on, we will do something. Then schools do it, hospitals do it. Then we pretty soon start wanting restaurants. Do you want to? Because when you go outside, of course, the dew point's low.
Yep.
But then again, you're outdoors, and it doesn't propagate the same way it does inside. When we're sitting here in a classroom or in any sort of office function. So we'll have to wait and see how that all turns out.
Okay, that makes complete sense. So I guess this is going to be the last thing that we're going to look at. So, I know that you spent a lot of time working with the folks at the VA over lots of years, many trips to Washington, things like that. So, and just in general, were there any highlights, that you had from, all the time that you spent dealing with the VA, or any other project that really stick with you?
Well, I think the VA has been, we did our first project for the VA in 1975, and it was part of what was called air conditioning in various buildings at the Tucson Hospital out here. And we essentially went through all 7 of the major buildings and upgraded their HVAC systems to current standards. what that allowed me to do was, as you said, many trips back to Washington. And the Department of Veterans Affairs, it still has today, but back then they had probably the best cadre of really knowledgeable and experienced HVAC engineers of anywhere on the planet. I mean, there's 182 VA medical centers across all 50 states. And these folks were they started to farm out the design work in the 70s, but prior to that, they were doing almost all of the HVAC design work in-house. And during my tenure, we did a tremendous amount of work with them in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And then it kind of tapered off. And one of the reasons it tapered off, which I couldn't quite argue with, was that the VA developed a really strong desire to give the design work or award the design work to veteran-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, small veteran-owned businesses. Well, GLHN, before we built an ESOP, and GLHN is still an ESOP, when it was just the three partners, well, two of us are veterans and we would have qualified, but not anymore. So the VA started to have a real preference for service-disabled veteran-owned businesses. And now service-disabled veteran-owned businesses probably do 80% of the design work for the VA. And it was a little bumpy in the beginning, but they're doing that now and things change. But the VA did provide lots of opportunities, learning opportunities, travel opportunities. We did what they called facility condition assessments, which was a comprehensive thing between the architectural, the structural, mechanical, and electrical, and a cost estimator. 5 of us would go to these different hospitals and spend, depending upon the size of the hospital, anywhere from 2 days to a week, really doing an intense study as to what do they need to upgrade this, both from an architectural or a programmatical standpoint, electrical, mechanical. So I think I've been to something like 82 different VA hospitals over a course of about 4 years, and that was interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was you know, it's like you've seen one, you've only seen one, and there was just a lot to see the way different parts of the country handled different things, and you know, what were you doing down in Florida, and like you go to San Juan, Puerto Rico, you know, that was one of them we went to, and then you go up to New York and all over. I mean, it was really an enlightening 4 or 5 years when we were doing these facility condition assessments to see all the different ways engineers and architects had helped develop these VA hospitals. So that was an interesting thing. I remember when we did the project in Tucson in 1975, one of the things we did was we said, oh, well, look at this. Here we're redoing all the ORs and doing all of that. And when we laid out the air handler for the operating, this is again 1975, our first submittal showed an evap cooler and a preconditioning coil. So we had 2-stage evap cooling, because with that, and that's where you can put a large coil in front of the coolers, and typically they were rotary coolers at that time, and you pre-cool the outside air, and then it passes through that adiabatic cooling device, and you can make 55-degree air. Well, it just so happens in 1975 was when the first Legionella thing came out. And oh my God, water and air don't mix. And they thought for sure that, oh my God, evap coolers cause Legionella. I says, no, because Legionella grows at about 80 or 82. That's what we find in cooling towers. The water in an evap cooler in Tucson, Arizona rarely gets over 65 degrees. So finally, after much things, they reluctantly let us put in an evap cooler in the OR in that very first VA project. But there's still some misconceptions about Legionella disease, and there's been these upticks of interesting things in the HVAC, and there'll be more to come. So there's plenty of opportunities for everybody else, and we'll take it from there, John.
It's definitely ever changing.
Yes, it is.
So we have an ever changing industry.
Yes, we do.
Definitely so.
And again, like I said in the beginning, for me it was a hobby that I got paid well for. So,
You are very fortunate.
Yeah.
So there's not many of us that get to say that. So thank you, Bill. So
Okay.
you know,
Thank you.
it's always enlightening for me to sit down and chew the fat with you a little bit. So we've done this a few times, and every time I get my new pearl of wisdom from Bill. So once again, thank you. I want to let you know how much that we at the local chapter have appreciated everything that GLHN has done for us with the seminars and our lunch meetings. Always the most well-attended meeting is something that either Bill's at or Henry Johnstone. It's a GLHN love fest. There's no doubt about it. So, but you're definitely well respected in the community. There's no doubt about it. So thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you for your time today, and look forward to seeing you again, and maybe we'll do this one more time.
maybe we will, John. Just let me
Okay.
know.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.